this notion of gender affirming care for children. That's tough, man. And the science on that, I haven't dove that deep into it, but I read one report and then there's one that's slightly contradictory. And then they said, there's no contradictory. Here's what the UK just came out with. You're full of shit. It's absolutely scientifically sound that it's outrageous.
Hey everyone. So California Governor Gavin Newsom, who is a Democrat, appeared on the Shawn Ryan show to talk about all things politics, including, among other things, so-called gender-affirming care for minors. And it did not go well. So let's watch him attempt to defend, kind of, his position on this.
In the major thing that I hear the most is the kids. And I don't know if California's one. I know Washington's one where, the state can come in and basically take your kid if you're against gender affirming care.
There's some nuanced language and around that. There are about 21 states, by the way, just on California's hardly, again, it's not the only, everyone back to California, but about 21 states that tend to operate in this space similarly with sort of variants along the same rules. And obviously California is one of them. But no, look, hey, I didn't even mean to cut you off except to say,
Gavin Newsom appears to be attempting some sort of interpretive hand dance as he wiggles around this question, which he clearly doesn't want to answer. I mean, he says, oh, California is one of a few other states, and California always gets the heat. Yeah, because you're the governor of that state, and you've endorsed something that's wrong. Despite everything, I still find Gavin's demeanor and persona very entertaining because it's just a classic politician. I mean, he is so slimy. You can't trust a word out of this man's mouth.
There's no doubt this issue, I thought it played a very significant and outsized role in the last election. I thought that ad, and by the way, I told Chris that and Susie when I was at the White House. Susie Wiles, the chief staff, and Chris, who ran the campaign and a lot of the media, when I was over at the White House earlier this year, we had a conversation around the trans issue, which was fascinating. I wish that one was recorded. And
I bet he does not wish that one was recorded.
And then met with the president right after, who was in the middle of a press conference as we were talking on the topic, and began a 90-minute meeting I had with him in the Oval talking about this very issue, where he said what I just said about, you got abortion. And I was like, come on, man, it's not politics. There's human beings here, but I get it. I get the politics, but it's also about human beings. But that ad, that trans ad, Kamala's for they, them, Trump's for you or something. That was powerful. And
I am sorry to keep hammering on this, but the hand motions are just ridiculous and distracting. I mean, he seriously looks like he is inventing some sort of California sign language. Also note how he totally avoids the question and instead pivots to sort of the political implications of mutilating children. Well, is mutilating young boys and girls good for the Democrats or bad for the Democrats? He can try to approach this purely from the angle of strategy for the Dems, but I think to most people, it's pretty transparent what he's doing. And yes, that ad was extremely bad for Democrats because it reminded the public of what their party was endorsing.
And it was an unforced error of the Harris campaign not to push back on it. But they had a few moves to push back because it was what it was. That gender affirming care was afforded under a lawsuit when she was AG, and part of the settlement compelled that the state had to move forward to allow for it. And it was a circumstance with an undoc person that was incarcerated that got the gender affirming care. Everything about it just met a political moment. And the fact that she defended it on a video only reinforced the vulnerability. And so they kept running the ad over and over and over again. It was incredibly impactful.
Well, yes, of course, the Trump campaign seized on something from Kamala that met the political moment, but more to the point, Kamala actually did that. She defended so-called gender-affirming care for inmates. In this case, an undock inmate. That term seems a little vague to me and too familiar also. I mean, presumably these people have some sort of documents floating in the ether, maybe from their home countries. So instead, we could just call them what they are, for which the term is a legal alien. But once you strip away the euphemisms, it becomes much more difficult to defend the positions that Newsom has aligned himself with, by virtue of being a Democrat and also by virtue of the policies that he enacted in California. So wasting taxpayer money on making sure illegal aliens can receive experimental hormone treatment or surgery or gender-affirming objects like underwear is a little bit less appealing to the general electorate, I think.
And as just, again, removing the humanity, right versus wrong, the morality on either side, politically, it is a major problem for the Democratic Party.
What about for your values? I mean, is 8 years old too young?
Yeah, I mean, look, I now that I have a 9-year-old, just became 9, come on, man, I get it. So those are legit. You know, it's interesting, just the issue of age. I haven't, it's interesting, as someone that's been so focused on equality, broadly, LGBT rights, particularly gay marriage. Mm-hmm. The trans issue for me is also novel. It's over the last few years, I'm trying to understand as much as anyone else, whole pronoun thing.
This is so amazing to witness. I love how the host just cuts through all of Newsom's blustering and says, yeah, but what about for you? What do you think about this whole thing? And Newsom's response is just the perfect non-answer. Yeah, man, I get it. He's playing dumb here and maybe trying to represent sort of a confused, aging guy who's not quite in touch with the youth, but wants to be on the right side of history. But unfortunately, again, I would like to remind him that he's the governor of the state. He's in a position of leadership. So if he can't figure out what should be a very simple moral issue, he certainly should not be in a position of leadership at the state level, at the local level. He definitely should not be president, though it remains to be seen whether he'll run.
And all of that. Well, you know, that was like the hell. I mean, all that stuff. I get it. All this stuff started to collapse on us. I joked with Charlie about Latinx. You know, I remember walking into my staff, I started using the word Latinx a few times. And then my chief of staff, who happens to be Hispanic, goes, would you shut up? I'm like, what? She goes, who uses that word? I said, I don't know. She said, my whole staff said, do not ever use that word again. I'm like, what's going on? I was like, okay. And they literally stopped. I'll never forget. I was like, whoa. We were on this sort of Zoom conversation. And literally my Hispanic chief of staff was like, shut up. And so I'm like, we were all kind of like, those meetings where my pronouns and everyone goes across. See, all this was sort of, I think, post-George Floyd, post-COVID, we kind of came out. And there was obviously this rights movement post-George Floyd, which you got to understand, on the basis of what occurred and all the social unrest. And there was a natural inclination then to try to course correct. But it was across the spectrum of issues, including increasingly on the issues of how we talk, communicate, how politically correct and sensitive people started becoming.
Well, first of all, Gavin, it's Latinx, not Latinx, so please get it right. Thank you very much. In all seriousness, this, again, is a total failure of leadership. I mean, he's admitting, according to this story, that he could be pushed this way and that way by the collective will of his staff. Of course, Newsom's right that you did see this huge upsurge in wokeness, in political correctness, whatever you want to call it. You know it when you see it. After George Floyd. It seems like the left really seized on that moment to secure their dominance, but ultimately, as you see with the trans issue, they were vastly overconfident in their power. I mean, for years, they had been able to cow people into towing the line by basically threatening to make them social outcasts or even getting them fired or kicked out of school. The trans thing was so great because it was so blatantly absurd and it demanded so much of its believers to say that a man is a woman or a woman is a man or sometimes both, that it allowed people an avenue to question and maybe attack some of the left's other nonsensical beliefs. I'll also say that I find Latinx particularly funny because there is already a gender-neutral word for a Latino or a Latina, which is Latin. They are a Latin person. But the whole point of using language like this is pretty much to signal to other people that you're one of the good ones and that you're high in virtue and morally upstanding, and to encourage them to adopt your framework.
Use of language, pronouns, and then issues around the trans community and this notion of gender affirming care for children. That's tough, man. And the science on that, I haven't dove that deep into it, but I read one report and then there's one that's slightly contradictory, and then they said there's no contradictory. Here's what the UK just came out with. You're full of shit. It's absolutely scientifically sound that it's outrageous, and so it's intense.
Newsom is having a bit of a Ketanji Brown Jackson moment here. I'm not a biologist. I can't say for certain whether a man can become a woman or not. He must be doing something right because he's survived in politics this long, and evidently the people of California, the state in which I was born and raised, don't have a problem with his slimy demeanor and terrible policies. So we'll have to see about 2028, but I would think that Newsom's team might want to give him some advice on how to answer this question the next time it appears, which it seems pretty much bound to, given that he refuses to give anyone a straight answer. But what did you think of Newsom's interview? Be sure to let me know in the comments section below. Give this video a like, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.